Hey guys, GhazzyTV here with another Path of Exile video, and in this one, I'm gonna tier list some goddamn minions. But before we go into the tier list, I do want to point out that on League launch, I'll be hosting a $90 supporter pack on Crucible League as soon as I drop my very first unique item. So as soon as that drops, I will be hosting a giveaway in the Twitch chat. Make sure you're in there when that happens. The link to my Twitch channel will be in the descriptions below. I'll catch you guys there. And don't forget to support the channel to pray to the YouTube algorithm gods by subscribing and leaving a comment down below and hitting that like button. It really appreciate it. It means a lot to me. So thank you so much for that. Let's just dive into the tier list. Now I'm going to start from the top because I know a lot of you guys want to know what the best build is. And we're going to start off with the Baller Mage created Poison SRS build guide, which we have a written guide for, which is linked to the descriptions below as well. This is a Giga broken, overpowered, and it will be 99% nerfed in 3.22. Now, the downside to this build is that it'll cost a bit more to get going compared to previous leagues due to the changes to the Breach as well as Abyss changes with the Amonimus Gaze and the United in Dream. And there's been a lot of changes to these things, but the efficiency of the build remains the same. Now, the way we solve this with a Poison SRS is to run a elemental hit version, which will pack about 3.5 million Shaper DPS, which is more than respectable to get going and to build up some currency so you can move into that Poison style as soon as possible. This build is very likely going to be the meta build of 3.21 when it comes to minions as well, so do keep that in mind. It's a really cool build, and if you want to take your opportunity to play it before it gets nerfed, now's the time. Moving over to the A tier of minion builds, I do want to point out that regular SRS is still solid, though not as broken as the Poison variant. However, it costs almost nothing compared to the Poison style when it comes to upgrading it to the higher budget state, especially with the build being in a state of meta. Outside of that, I do want to say that another A tier build would be a Golemancer, because it remains a solid pick. Nothing too fancy or broken in the current state of the build. You are having the access to going Poison with it if you so choose to. You can do both high damage dealing or high defensive versions of the build. Another A tier build that excels more in clear speed than boss damage and is absolutely bonkers due to snapshotting is the Arakaalis Fang build. Now, this has a bit of a niche playstyle, but it has the possibility of insane scaling via the snapshotting, which is basically requiring you to have a Squire and an Arakaalis Fang, which allows you to have tons of damage when you're summoning your minions. And then you can do a weapon swap. And in the weapon swap, having Arakaalis Fang still in the other hand as well, but you no longer need any support gems because you're already summoned your 20 spiders with the Arakaalis and the Squire equipped. Is the only thing that you have to think about when doing it this way is that once the duration is over, you're going to have to re-equip the weapon swap and then do the summoning again and then re-equip the weapon swap and go and clear the maps again. This allows you to have a setup with a Squire and Arakaalis with a bunch of support gems, and the other weapon slot would have a Arakaalis and an Aegis Aurora. I played this during 3.20 and had a lot of fun with it. It's an extremely good clearing speed build. Pops everything with the Profane Bloom Explosion from the Occultist. Absolutely beautiful to play. I was playing a version from Casual Dan, who has a guide on this on the PoE Vaults. Moving on to another A tier build would be the Absolution, which recently got the Vaal Absolution version. Now, this has always been one of the highest damage dealing minions in the game. The downside consists of having 25% chance of hitting unique or rare to spawn a sentinel, and clear speed though is a bit so-so, which hopefully the Vaal version will actually help solve. A lot of people think that the Vaal version is going to be the Giga bossing build version of this build, but that's not really the case from where I'm sitting. Absolution has always been insanely effective at clearing off bosses with tremendous amount of damage as long as you're able to stay alive long enough to get that minion out so they can start surging down the bosses. But it does clear a bit so-so. Now, the Vaal version of this allows you to have some bigger area of effect as well as some pretty cool new abilities that the Ascended version of the Sentinel will actually be using to help you clear much, much faster. So I'm very curious to see how this will plan out and how it will be played in 3.21. I do want to mention another S tier build, which is more focused on being extremely tanky, but most importantly, becoming an extremely effective league starting build. This is the none other than the Zoomancer Necromancer. Build guide for this is obviously in my guide hub, linked in the descriptions below. Now, this is the closest minion build in PoE that brings back that nostalgic Diablo 2 Necromancer feeling. Now, the downside is mostly oriented around the clear speed being a bit so-so, similar to the Absolution. Unlike the Absolution, the Zoomancer doesn't have a tremendous amount of single target damage either, What it does instead is that it is able to summon over 70 minions, and you are extremely rarely ever going to be targeted by enemies because they're going to be busy with 70 minions, and that's 70 with a 7-0, not 17. It's insane. Visual clarity, though, doesn't exist with this build. It's really fun to play, though, so give it a try if you haven't. Another A-tier build is another one that's going to be provided with another Vaal skill. That is the Vaal Animate weapon. Now, this is the best option to be able to compete with a Poison SRS, but however, the information we have on Animate weapon is that it is impossible to tell if it's going to be able to compete until we try the Vaal version. Because of the RNG base of the Vaal version, I would say that it's more safe to say that Poison SRS will still remain the top dog when it comes to the Poison style. Now, the downside of the build is the fact that the weapons actually can be targeted by enemies because they have an aggro table. Obviously, this allows the weapons to taunt enemies, which the SRS cannot. But unlike SRS, the enemies will actually be targeting the weapons, which means you have to focus a bit of defensive scaling to your weapons or you will lose all your damage by having your weapons die. This is one of the biggest issues Animate weapon have in general, and despite this, I think that Animate weapon with the Vaal version could be a really fun build to play, even though it has a very different playstyle compared to SRS. But I'm very much looking forward to trying this out in 3.21. This brings me to another A-tier build, and that is Chains of Command. Now, this is completely gated behind the gear that you have on your Animate Guardian, and that's why most new and newer players will not play this in their first couple of builds when playing Path of Exile. It's a really cool map clearing build, though. With lower investments comes great risk of having the AG die and or just poor performance in general. So normally I would recommend that if anybody tries to play a Chains of Command build, which you really should if you're enjoying that kind of play style, that you know what you're doing before you're diving yourself into it, because having your Animate Guardian die in this build is definitely detrimental. Because if it dies, you have no damage. You can't play the build until you put some new gear on him, since the build is completely oriented around that chest piece, making the weapon spawn from the Animate Guardian's kills. There is a build guide for this, linked in the descriptions below, of course. The other A-tier build is the Skelly Mages. Now, compared to before, there is a build guide video linked in the descriptions below that you can check out for this that I made recently. The build performs all rightish compared to before because they got a significant nerf, but thanks to the returning projectile changes in 3.21, we're now able to bring it up to a more comfortable and playable state that I'm looking forward to playing. This is probably the build that I'll be league starting on Friday, so if you're looking into checking out the performance of this, don't hesitate. Just come over and give me a follow on the Twitch channel, and I'll see you guys there. There will be a giveaway hosted there, as I mentioned before, so do check that out as well. This should be rather cheap, since it's no longer the meta. But most importantly, the Dead Reckoning Jewel that is the build enabling unique for this type of build is now gated behind a vendor recipe that is very easy to collect. Now, the solution to the single target damage output is entirely coming from the anomalous faster projectile, giving the projectile 60% chance to return, and on their way back, they can hit the target again. So it's a really cool system. The video guide linked in the description below will go more in depth in this, so do check that out. Moving over to a lower tier, it's the B tier, and I'm going to start with talking about the Soulwrest. Now, Soulwrest is extremely effective on lower budget because you don't need any 6-link, which allows you to actually have a very high functional build early on without requiring to spend a lot of currency to make the build functional for the high endgame map farming. Now, the problem, though, is that the staff is mandatory, and it falls behind the other options towards higher endgame, in my opinion. Even when you start shoving in currency and start investing into this build, I feel like the efficiency per currency invested is a little bit on the low end, which is why I'm putting it on a B tier. Another B tier build is actually the Dominating Blow. I was contemplating putting this in the A tier because of how insanely effective Dominating Blow is on league starting, since it requires pretty much nothing to get this build going. And you can go Poison with Dominating Blow without that costing a lot of currency compared to things like SRS, because of the inherited design of the Dominating Blow dealing fist damage. And with the Vaal version, Vaal Domination, I'm actually very, very excited to test this out when the league launches. Now, it always have been and probably always will be and remain one of the most effective, no need to buy anything kind of league starting builds. And with a progressive campaign, as well as map stage, including the red tier maps. Now, downside consists of having rather poor single target damage output, though it is still very capable of dealing with the initial endgame pinnacle bosses for the stones, such as Cirrus or These Eater Worlds or Searing Exarch. The fight might take some time, but the build is pretty beefy and should not have any issues with actually handling them despite that. And moving over to the last tier that we have, it's the F tier, and we're going to start with Pure Zombies. Now, the problem with the Pure Zombies is that it actually gets outperformed by a vast majority of builds, but most notably, it gets outperformed by having a 5-link zombies combined with 5-link golems. You're essentially having zombies and golems, and then having 4 support gens, creating 2 5-links, if you will. And it is mostly just used for utility roles for soaking damage or using Feeding Frenzy, Elemental Army for exposure or combustion, and that's basically all it's there for. I use it quite a lot in low budget builds just to make sure that the zombies are acting as beat shields for me to cover my ass. But other than that, I feel like Pure Zombies are very, very lackluster. Now, don't get me wrong, you are able to make Pure Zombies do damage and actually perform if you shove enough currency into it. And I don't like having this necessity of pouring currency after currency after currency onto a build to make it work when I can spend a fraction of that and have another build that actually performs without spending that much. The other portion of the F tier that I want to tackle, and the last one for this video, is the Spectres. Spectres have been dragged through the mud for years upon years now, and it's just absolutely disgusting with what they've done to the build. And it's really sad. And I'm not just talking about Syndicate Operatives. I'm talking about every single Spectre build. There are some Spectres that can perform very well. We have Poisonous Syndicate Operatives. Cost quite a lot of currency to make that happen, but it does work. You can play Hero's Watch. You can play, well, the Redemption Sentries, but Hero's Watch are actually the better version of that. You can play Primal Crush Claws, but ultimately, none of these will perform very well unless you pour a bunch of currency into it. I'm not a big fan of this. And I know some people will say that, yeah, well, it still works. Yes, it does. But if you compare the amount of currency you're spending to get to that efficiency compared to a vast majority of other minion builds, the Spectres will remain an F tier, and they really need to rework the Spectres one way or another because the current state of them is just sad. That's basically my tier list of these minion builds. I know there's quite a few minion builds out there that I have not tackled in this tier list, and I deem them to be a little bit too niche. I will briefly mention Bama, also known as Blink Arrow, Mirror Arrow build. Best creator for that would be Previ himself here on YouTube. Has some absolutely crazy builds for this. I believe that one got significantly buffed for the 3.21. Seems to be really crazy, but the problem is that it's so niche that I didn't want to tackle it into a tier list because the people that do like or play those builds, they're going to be extremely biased to them, and people who don't play them, they simply don't play them for the lack of knowledge of the build or because of its niche playstyle. There's some other things such as Law of the Wilds, Wolves builds, and a few other things. So I wanted to stay away from the very niche ones and tackle the more generic builds that people know about, such as Soulwrest, DB, Zombies, Skeletons, the whole shebang, basically. So hope you guys like this tier list, and I believe I'm pretty accurate on it. We'll see how the Dominating Blow, Animate Weapon, and Absolution will work with the Vaal skills as the launch of Crucible happens on Friday. If you liked the video, don't forget to leave a comment down below, like it, and don't forget to subscribe. That helps the support, this prayers to the YouTube algorithm gods, and it supports the channel lots. I appreciate that, guys. Thank you. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Till then, as always, stay safe. Keep rocking.